Hi my loves, welcome back. Today I am doing my long awaited October books video. I am sorry we are so late this month. I did not have the bandwidth to think properly and put my thoughts about these books together over the past few weeks, but I am back today and I hope that this video will be coherent and helpful and useful, and we've got some great books to talk about. Actually, I had quite an up and down month. I was expecting to enjoy my October books a bit more than I did. Some books were great, some books less so. Oh, and there's definitely going to be some really unpopular opinions in this video, which I'm a little bit nervous about, because I did read some beloved books this month and I didn't love all of them. I also actually don't have such full notes this month for this video, because I thought if you do not just sit down and film this video and get it edited and get it uploaded, then it is not going to happen. But I hope that you will enjoy. But without further ado, let's get into it. Because we are so far through November already, I have put aside book club for this month and we'll start again in December, because I can't expect you all to read a book before the end of November when it is, you know, almost over. So here is October's pile. I'm going to drop it. So yes, this is October's pile. If you watched my October TBR, you will notice there are some books missing. I didn't get through everything, but the pile isn't too unimpressive, to be fair. Okay, starting with my book club picks, we had Perfume and we had White is for Witching. I'm going to start with White is for Witching because it was my favourite of the two. So this is by Helen Oyeyemi. So I thought this was a really interesting, layered, complex little book that did have some of those spooky season elements. There's hauntings, there's kind of vampire references, there's haunted house vibes. Yeah, it's got all the kind of spooky season things that you might like, but it does quite a lot of quite different things with those tropes. So it is about a house in Dover and the kind of family that owns this house, and they are trying to run it as a B&B, which is quite tricky because the house seems to have a mind of its own. It's useful to know, so when you open the book, the first little section quite obviously has three separate narrators. There's Ore, there's Elliot, and then there's the house itself. I've had to just adjust myself a little bit because I am super uncomfortable sat on the floor today. It is useful to know that this book is continually narrated by those three characters, so the house continues to have a voice. Can be a little bit confusing sometimes, this book, so yes, it is useful to know that there are multiple narrators, one of which is the house itself. The house seems to sort of perpetuate its desires, or try to perpetuate its desires, through the female line, and its latest victim is Miranda Silva, who is a twin. Her brother Elliot also lives in the house. They have recently lost their mother just before this book begins, so that has various different consequences as well. I don't think I'm ruining anything to say that the house has this kind of vicious hatred of the other. It's very xenophobic in all aspects, racist, anti-immigration, that sort of thing, and it does exist in Dover, which is a kind of borderland of its own. It's right on the coast of England. If you don't know, it's got a history of being the point of crossing to mainland Europe. It has a kind of history with world wars as well. That's why it's kind of set in Dover, and why I think the house acts as it does. Yes, it's really, really good, this book. When I look at people's reviews of it, they are often not entirely sure what's going on in it, which is kind of its style. It has a very lyrical, dreamy sort of style, and like I said, it's got those three narrators and it's not always clear who's speaking, so you kind of have to concentrate a little bit. You do have to focus reading it, I think, to get the most out of it. Apologies for the building works. But yes, sometimes I read novels written in a lyrical style and I sort of come on here and complain that they lack substance, or they lack driving force, or there's just something kind of major missing with them. But this is a good example, along with Toni Morrison's work, of a book that is really lyrical in style, that is really quite beautiful at lots of moments, but it does have that substance, it does have that driving force. It doesn't even have to have loads and loads of plot, but there is something within this book that I think sometimes lyrical novels do lack. Everything's there for a reason, it's very layered, there's lots and lots of themes packed into quite a small book. It has a driving force, it has a kind of ideology running under it. It's just very well put together. The prose reflects the themes reflect the prose, and it all just works together. So yes, it's not that I don't like lyrical novels, I just like them to have some of that running underneath them. It does, I think, make this probably a little bit more obscure and a bit trickier to read, maybe, just because it is a bit more confusing. But I think for me as a reader it's more rewarding. There's so much going on in here. Ideas about gender, about eating and consumption of food, trigger warning for eating disorders with this book, but also about therefore our relationship with our bodies, bodily functions, how that interacts with gender, because that can be very gendered, the space and place of the home and physical space in general, how physical space functions alongside our sort of psyches. There's ideas about race, immigration, xenophobia, the concept of borders and borderlands, as well as inheritance, family, inheritance through the female line. All of those things are happening in this quite short little book. It's not super short, but for a book with so much happening, it is quite short. So yes, I would really highly recommend this one. You could read this at any time of year. Like I say, it has got elements of hauntings in it, and various things that do make it appropriate to October, but because it's got so much more to it, you could read this whenever you want, and I really enjoyed it. And this is, like I said in my October TBR, the first Oyeyemi that I've read for adults, and now I'm very intrigued by her other writing, so I will be reading other books from her. But yeah, I feel like she gets a bit of a mixed reaction on like Goodreads and stuff, so but now I know that I kind of like her style, I think. So that's why it is for witching. Next we have Patrick Süskind's Perfume, the story of a murderer. So like I said in my October TBR, this is a much beloved novel, and many of you were very excited when I said I was going to read it. I think always the problem when you go into a book with such high expectations, it can very easily fall short of those. I'm sure that's been the case for many of you when I've raved about a book and then you've gone to read it and been like, I'm not sure about this. It happens. It's been known to happen. But I also was just expecting this book to be very different to the book that it actually is. I don't know why, whether it's from my memories of the film or from kind of just what I expected this story to be like. It's just quite different. So again, that can usually affect reviews a lot, even though if you took the book for what it was, you'd enjoy it more. Does that make sense? Anyway, the best thing about this book is its premise. So the premise is that Jean-Baptiste Grenouille, don't know if I'm saying that right, is an orphan. He's living in 18th century Paris, and he has this remarkable gift, which is an amazing sense of smell, and it really alters his perception of the world. And although this gives him some advantages in life above other orphans, because he can use this gift for, you know, selling perfumes, for instance, he is a kind of super weird character. I don't know if I want to label him as anything specific, but he is very disconnected from the people that surround him, and whether that's because he was an orphan, he had a mother who committed multiple infanticides and just was born into weird circumstances, whether it's because he grew up in an orphanage devoid of love and was generally devoid of love, or whether it's kind of to do with his gift and how that makes him different from other people. It's not really clear, but it's clear that there is something very, very weird going on with Jean-Baptiste. This novel is a lot slower than I thought it was going to be. There's a lot less murdering than I thought there was going to be. I hope that's not spoiling anything. And it was just kind of less thrilling. It is actually more often than not like a darkly humorous book, and the narrator is quite self-aware. It has that sort of self-aware historical narration style that I actually typically really like, and I did like it in this. It just wasn't what I was expecting. So yeah, it's less creepy and unsettling than I thought it would be. And I know that might strike some people as weird because they're like, it's definitely pretty weird and pretty unsettling. And it's true, Jean-Baptiste is a very strange character, and the concept is strange, and also sometimes narration that is darkly humorous actually makes things more unsettling because you're like, this isn't funny. But anyway, I did find it less sort of unsettling than I thought I would. But I guess that's also different from person to person. Things I wanted more from this. I just wanted it to move a little faster sometimes. Sometimes I did find it was going a bit slow. And I wanted a bit more thought going into it. I think this book is what it is, like I said, but I liked the bits where the narrator describes how Jean-Baptiste's sense of smell really differentiates him in his perception of the world from other human beings, and I wanted more of that. That's the kind of thing that I really enjoy as a reader. Does your perception change who you are, etc, etc. It was a very big part of my dissertation, so it's just something I'm always like tuned into, is how that sort of change in what your major sense is, in this case being scent, how that really changes your view of the world, how you act in the world. Because as humans, we are generally quite visual creatures. So yes, so anyway, so I wanted more of that. I wanted more of an explanation and a justification for why particularly young virgin women were exuding this incredible scent to Jean-Baptiste. Is that something to do with Jean-Baptiste? Is that something to do specifically with the young women? Why not young men? Why not older women? Etc, etc. However, this book was written in the 80s. It's about a murderer who murders young women, which is the classic murder storyline, unfortunately. So I can't expect too much of Süskind there, but it's something I would have obviously preferred. I do think he does a fantastic job of bringing 18th century France to life. I do think the prose is very fluid, is very readable, but yes, I had my problems with it. I did enjoy it, don't get me wrong. I just, yeah, wasn't as thrilled or excited by this book as I was expecting it to be. I'm going to zoom you in a bit because I feel like I look like a little pea head. Moving all over the place today, everyone. Right, next we have Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. This is a fun book. I feel like I read it aeons ago. Literally, it feels like I read it so long ago. So yes, bear that in mind as I try to speak about it. But this is a really fun book. It's written like a modern fairy tale, although it's more, I think Gaiman had written a lot of graphic novels and comic books before he wrote this. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that is the case. At least I know he was a big fan of graphic novels and comic books, and it definitely reads like someone who is a fan of those things, kind of translated into novel form. So it's less fairy tale like than Stardust, for instance, which I read earlier this year. Again, feels like a lifetime ago. It's about a young man called Richard Mayhew. He moves to London from Scotland to sort of go and work in the city, become a city boy, and he stumbles across one evening a young girl named Dor, you heard that right, who just seems to kind of have appeared out of the wall. And he helps her, and he sort of embroils himself in all of her problems, basically, in the act of saving her. And she belongs to London Below. So London Below being a network of places beneath the streets of London, mostly beneath the streets of London, however it does kind of come above, but just in a magical way as well. And because he kind of accesses London Below, he begins to sort of disappear from London above. And so he and Dor go on this quest adventure to sort Dor's situation out, to sort his situation out because he no longer exists in London above, and yeah, just journey through London below together and get up to hijinks. Basically, it's that one of those kind of quest narratives. I loved it because it was a fun and familiar setting for me. I love recognising little bits of London. It's got a charismatic, intriguing cast of eccentric characters who you will remember. It's a little bit messy. I believe it was the second novel that Gaiman wrote after Good Omens, which he wrote with Terry Pratchett. So it feels like a young novel, as in like a novel that comes early in someone's career, and the logic of it doesn't always run exactly true, but very enjoyable read. And there are some things that probably wouldn't fly today, but it was generally very, very enjoyable, and I liked it a lot more than Good Omens, and it's put me back in my Gaiman frame of mind and reminded me that I would like to read more Gaiman, just not Good Omens. Next we have a book I don't have because I listened to it, and that is Natives, Race and Class in the Ruins of Empire by Akala. So this is probably one of the best audiobooks I've listened to, full stop, definitely this year, but also full stop. It is a non-fiction. It is about, unsurprisingly, race and class in the UK, particularly as it purports to our history with the British Empire, because that informs so much of race and class, even as they are existing right up to now. So yes, it's essentially about race and class in the UK, and therefore the British Empire is a big part of that. It was compelling, it was very informative, it was very listenable. I often find my mind wandering with audiobooks and I just can't really get into them for whatever reason. But this one I found to be very compelling. I didn't find my attention wandering with it. I listened to Akala himself reading it, which it's not true, it can't possibly be true that all authors are great readers, nor can it possibly be true that all authors will be the best readers for their books, but I do particularly like when a writer does read their own book for the audiobooks. I just enjoy it. I just like listening to the author's actual voice, and I do think they often do a very good job. Yes, and I've often found myself watching videos of Akala speak because he just speaks really well. He has this really, really amazing way of making really complex ideas, big ideas, very digestible, very listenable, very readable, but at the same time maintaining their complexity, not simplifying them too much. He just makes them digestible. Obviously I think this would work well in book form as well, not just listening to it, but it did work well listening to it. So, like many of the other books I've been reading recently about race, there's a mix of memoir and historical fact and history here. Quite different though from the sort of Baldwin inspired books that I've been reading out of the US. This one was a lot more kind of matter of fact, direct. It's Akala's own specific style of writing, explaining things, talking about things, and I thought it worked really well. I liked his own personal style of writing as well. He writes about a huge number of topics within the diaspora, and you know, it's very outward looking. Obviously it has to be because it's dealing with the idea of empire as well. There's a lot going on in this book, and it's quite a manageable page count. I think I looked it up the other day, I think it's about 350 pages, so it's not small but it's not huge either. So I think it would make a fantastic introduction if you're wanting to know how race and class work and interact in the UK, because I think he covers a big range of things and gives you a really good overview. And at the same time, I do think you'll learn new stuff because he covers so much stuff, even if you're already familiar with quite a lot of the information. So yes, an important book, so important. If you're British, I would highly recommend it, especially if this is something that you're kind of unfamiliar with. It's so readable. Like I said, it's not an enjoyable topic, but it's definitely listenable. I enjoyed the process of listening to it because I learnt a lot that is Natives. I'm gonna get myself a physical copy at some point, but I'll definitely be reading anything else he writes. Has he written other stuff? Probably. Okay, I'm thinking of Anythings by Iain Reid. I feel like lots of people love this one, and I'm here to tell you I really liked it too, and I really enjoyed it too. Hooray! Yes, so this is probably the creepiest book that I read this month. I read this quite early on in October, and I was sort of expecting the rest of my month to, especially with the horror books that I'd picked out, to be equally creepy, but actually this was the pinnacle of my creepy experience this month. Now, this is all going to depend on what you find creepy. I found some reviews of people saying I didn't find this scary at all, or I didn't really get this, or it just wasn't for me, and that will certainly be the case. But for me, I think in terms of like horrors or like, yeah, thrillers, this kind of style is doing it for me. But yes, like I said in my October TBR, and I will say again here, I'm not very well versed in the horror genre. There are some fantastic booktubers and people out there that are much better versed in it than me, but if you're like me and you're sort of a horror newbie, then I'm hoping that my reviews might be somewhat helpful. Obviously I'm really intrigued by the genre because Jeff Vandermeer, who you know is one of my favourite authors, often writes from within horror or uses horror tropes quite a lot, so yeah, it's definitely something I want to read more of, but I've discovered that I'm picky about it. But yes, so anyway, I don't want to explain too much about this book because I think going into it knowing as little as possible is probably a good idea. But it's about a girl and a boy. They're a couple and they're on the way to the boys' parents' house in a remote farmhouse location on a dark snowy night. So definite good creepy vibes going on there. And it's narrated by the girl, and she is kind of curious about her partner's parents and is going to go through with this and meet them and everything, but she's also at the same time thinking of ending things between them for various different reasons. It's got these kind of short, direct, fragmentary sentences. There's quite a lot of dialogue, and so it's got this very direct feeling. It's got this very readable feeling, but also at the same time all these kind of slightly weird things keep occurring, and it starts to give it a bit of a nightmarish quality as well. So I really like the prose style of this in general. I just thought it was just good at creating atmosphere. Yes, like I mentioned in my vlog when I talked about reading this, I didn't love the ending, but caveat to that, I do think horror and thriller endings are the hardest endings to write because you've got readers who are trying to guess what's going on the whole way through, and you want to drop some hints in the main body of the text, but you don't want to make it too obvious. Obviously, it's much more fun and easier, I imagine, as a writer to create an atmosphere, to set up a weird premise, but it's much harder to bring all of those strings together and do a really good conclusion. So I didn't hate the ending of this book, but I just wanted it to be more complex, not less complex, which might come across as weird to some readers because I know that this ending does sort of come as a bit of a shock, a bit of a surprise, and does baffle quite a lot of readers, but I actually wanted it to be more confusing. I did really like this, and I'm willing to go along with the ending. You know, I didn't hate it, but I really did like this book, and I will read more from Iain Reid. Has he written other stuff? I think this is his first book. More recommendations like this one would be good. Next up, we have Tana French's In the Woods, another much loved book. Tana French also just loved in general. And this is a tricky review. If you've read this book, you'll know what it is that I am conflicted about. But basically, French upends one of the major tropes or sort of conventions within murder mystery stories, novels, in this book, and I am still undecided as to whether that's a really clever, brave, and sort of literary and exciting thing to do, or whether it's just really, really annoying. So yes, I think I like it, but I am still frustrated. It's about Rob Ryan. He's a detective in the Dublin Murder Squad, which doesn't actually exist. And he is called to investigate a murder in his hometown. But nobody knows that it's his hometown, apart from his partner Cassie, his work partner, who he has a fantastic relationship with, and it's one of the best parts of this book. But anyway, but yes, nobody knows that this is his hometown because he has his own secret, which is that as a child he and his two friends went into the woods to play like they usually would have done, and basically two of them never came home, but he did come home. He was found I think later that evening or something, maybe the next day, sort of shivering by a tree with blood on him, and all the rest of it. So two of his friends went missing, he did not go missing, and he doesn't remember what happened. That is a fantastic opening to a book, and he's going to investigate this new murder, etc, etc, etc. I really liked the first couple hundred pages of this book. I just thought it was really good. I think French's prose style is so nice in it. It's first person narration, so a bit of a unreliable narrator alert. But yeah, it's very engaging prose style, it's very personable. It's also quite beautiful, which is not something you always find in sort of crime, murder, mystery books. So I liked that a lot. But basically, this book is best, and I think the point of this book is with its character study of Rob. That's what it's doing. It's giving you a really good character study of Rob. And I did enjoy that element, and I thought it was really good and well written. But yes, like I said at the beginning, it's a little frustrating, and it will confound and irritate readers who like neater, more kind of satisfying by the book mysteries, and there's nothing wrong with that, just depends on what you like as a reader. But I am keen to read more of French's work, so I think that's a good sign. Next we have Mexican Gothic by Silvia, Moreno-Garcia. I have no strong feelings about this book. I didn't love it, I didn't hate it, I will probably forget about it pretty soon. I feel like that always sounds, when I say something like that, I always feel like that sounds harsher than when I dislike a book. Because when I dislike a book, at least I remember it for all the things I didn't like about it. Whereas this one, I just felt very meh about. I'm sorry if I'm going in and out of focus, by the way. For some reason the camera is struggling today. For starters, this book did not scare me or thrill me in any way. It's a gothic horror or a gothic fantasy. I do think part of the purpose of this book is to do a little bit of unnerving, I guess, but for me it just didn't really do that. It's quite slow to start, and it kind of gradually builds, which is not something I'm usually opposed to. I found the conclusion a bit predictable, the whole thing a bit predictable, and nothing about it particularly exciting. One thing I did note, and I saw other people saying as well, is that I think this would work really well as or much better as a TV series or film, with that kind of gothic 1950s Mexico setting, and some of the storyline elements I just think would work better visually, and I don't think Moreno-Garcia's writing really created that atmosphere for me, but I think visually that atmosphere would be created. Trigger warning for sexual violence in this book, it kind of came out of the blue, and then I was like, oh, that's uncomfortable. So yes, trigger warning for that. But yes, I'm sad to say I did not feel much about this book in general. Next we have The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson, another haunted house narrative, and not one that I particularly enjoyed either. Again, I feel like maybe I'm going to catch some flack for this. I'm sorry. I did finish Mexican Gothic, and then I moved on to this one, and I thought, am I just a really bad horror reader, or maybe horror isn't for me? But then I remembered reading I'm Thinking of Ending Things, which I really enjoyed. Remembered Jeff Vandermeer and all the horror things about his books that I really like. Maybe I just like particular brands of horror and not others. So if you like this particular brand of horror, please do not let my opinion change that or annoy you. I think it is really quite a subjective genre, because what scares you will not scare someone else sort of thing. And yes, I feel like it's even more subjective than other genres for that reason, because the main point of these books is to be horror, like horrifying, and if that doesn't get you, then sort of some of the major parts of it probably you're not gonna enjoy. I didn't find this book scary at all. Again, that might be been even down to my mood whilst reading it, that I wasn't suspending my disbelief enough, I wasn't immersed enough, I was distracted whilst reading it, but I just really didn't find it scary. And without that element, for me, there wasn't much for me to enjoy. I also kind of put that down to the age of this book. I think it was published in 1959. So yes, it's going to be received now a lot differently to the way it would have been received then. But I'm sure you're familiar with the story. It's about a group of people. They're invited to Hill House by this man who wants to investigate the supernatural goings on at said house, and he's invited various people. I think the owner of the house, or the person that will own the house next, and 2 young women that responded to his adverts, one of whom is quite impressionable and quite delicate. So it's very much about how the house interacts with the psyches of the occupants, particularly the protagonist, or who appears to be the protagonist, Eleanor. And I do think there was lots in here that would make a good study for someone wanting to think about women's issues, and also psychological problems in the 1950s. Definitely think there's lots in here about that. However, I didn't really connect with Eleanor, I didn't really connect with any of the characters, and yes, that made it quite difficult for me to enjoy this book. Again, I think that might be down to its age a little bit. It's like I kept waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for something to happen, and then I was like, oh hang on, I'm 30 pages from the end of this book. I don't think anything exciting is going to happen here. So yes, I'm afraid to say that this ghost story did not get me. But it's worth looking at other reviews for this, for people that did really like it. It just was not for me, sadly. Moving on, I'm saving my most controversial opinion for last. Moving on to Demon Voices by Philip Pullman. This is a book of, well, it says essays on storytelling, but it's essentially a group of essays and talks that Philip Pullman's given over the last 20 years or so about all the things that Philip Pullman likes to talk about a lot. You all know I'm a huge fan of his Dark Materials. It was my childhood thing. I loved it. I have his Dark Materials tattoos. I'm a big geek for it. I actually read all of Pullman's books as a kid. I read his Sally Lockhart books as well, and all of that sort of stuff, and I've always loved him. So yes, I listened to this, and I listened to it read by Pullman himself again. I enjoyed that element because I like Pullman's voice to start with, and it's just nice to hear him specifically read it, especially because a lot of these were originally actually given as talks anyway. Whilst I sort of enjoyed the process of listening to this, I would not recommend it for anyone that is not a Pullman fan. But yeah, like I said, Pullman has a few topics that he likes to talk about. So do I, to be fair. So does everyone. But this is a little bit repetitive sometimes. Those topics are religion, fantasy, which includes not considering himself a fantasy author / considering himself different from other fantasy authors, which has me questioning what fantasy books he's been reading, and also hating Tolkien. So those things. About writing, he likes to talk about that. William Blake, Paradise Lost, the importance in science, literary theory being mostly crap / annoying. Yes, I love a bit of literary theory myself. And also teaching English. And art. There's a couple of art-based talks in here as well, which it is more useful to actually have the book to hand because it has the paintings there for you to look at. So those are the things Pullman likes to talk about, and that is what mostly makes up these essays. I think he's most interesting on writing, about the process of writing his Dark Materials, and some of his writing tips. I think you have to take any writing tips and writing suggestions with a little bit of a pinch of salt. I found a lot of his opinions very generalised. A lot of these were quite short talks, to be fair to him. They're not long, you know, detailed deep dives into various topics. They're short talks, so I think a lot of it was a little bit generalised for me, and some of the stuff was a bit outdated, either opinions or writing advice. So I enjoyed it, but I wouldn't recommend it for anyone that isn't a big Pullman fan already. Okay, finally on to my most unpopular opinion. This is The Shining by Stephen King. I really didn't like this book at all. So, like I said in my October TBR, I had actually never watched the film either, and I ended up watching the film this month before I read the book. And I found the film to be good, aesthetically incredible, performances were great, but I sort of found myself agreeing when I googled it with Stephen King's assessment that it felt a bit surfacey, like it felt like there was no reasoning behind some of the stuff that went on. I don't know if that's going to make any sense. You can read what Stephen King said about the film. But anyway, he didn't really like the film. And I was like, yeah, I do feel like this is a bit aesthetically beautiful, but not very deep. And I didn't find it very scary. So, with this in mind, I was poised for the King book to give me all those things that I felt the film was lacking. Unfortunately, it did not. So we all know the story, I'm assuming. But Jack Torrance takes a job at the Overlook Hotel. It's a big hotel in Colorado. He takes the job as the winter caretaker, and he's going to take up his wife and his kid, and they're going to live there for a few months by themselves, probably mostly snowed in, to keep the hotel sort of running and so that it's not in, you know, a dire condition by the time everybody comes back in spring. This obviously leads to some severe cabin fever. Terrible things happen. Jack loses his mind, the hotel seems cursed, and his little boy Danny also seems to have some sort of supernatural power called the Shining, which seems to amplify some of the strange happenings in the hotel. Sorry, I've just had to move you again. I was expecting there to be some real development here for Jack Torrance, from man to monster. However, the red flags are so glaring from page 1. I was like, oh, I was really expecting this to be a sort of breakdown, but it looks like he has already broken down. So that was, I don't know if that was just something I had in my mind, but I feel like a remote setting is set up for that. It's set up for you to go from relatively normal person to complete scary person, and really he was complete scary person from the outset for me. Yes, there are going to be some people that really do not like me for saying that I don't think this book is a good character study of Jack Torrance either. I mean, compare it to something like In the Woods, it's for me not a very good character study, and that will be a surprise to some, I think, because there's so many pages dedicated to looking at Jack's character and his psychological state. But there's no bit by bit breakdown. There's no slow reveal of small aspects and small things that will reveal more about his character. We sort of know it from page 1. It's quite predictable, it's quite systematic. I wrote this in my notes, I said being long-winded does not a good character study make. So harping on about the same stuff does not mean you're doing a good character study. For me, it felt very two-dimensional. But yes, without the fear factor, because I don't know if I've already said that, I didn't find this book frightening at all. Without the fear factor for me, a good character study was really, really needed. In general, I just found it to be really long. It really dragged. I found it quite boring. I'm really sorry. I'm so sorry. Also, this was an issue for me with The Outsider, and I thought it was just because it was one of King's sort of later books, and I didn't know whether maybe he'd come out of his sort of prime time of writing or whatever. But I need more logic to my supernatural system. I need something underlying it. I need an ideology underlying it. I think that's because I'm typically a fantasy reader, and those things are important to me in fantasy, so when I have them in horror, I also need them there. It's something that Jeff Vandermeer does very well with all his weird happenings. There's always an ideology underlying it. And for me, that often makes things scarier, because there's like a I don't know why, I can't quite describe why right this second, but yes, I like systems, I like reasons for my supernatural elements, beyond, you know, lots of people died here for some reason. I actually think the film did that better, because there is some reasoning as to why the hotel is cursed in the film. So yes, so Jeff Vandermeer does that, Helen Oyeyemi did it in White is for Witching. Stephen King does not give you really much of a reason at all. It's like, people died here and this hotel is cursed. So it's not what I prefer, basically. So yeah, overall I actually ended up coming out preferring the film, and I think the film is a good adaptation of the book, because it is quite surfacey, it is quite, Jack Torrance is pretty bad and he goes and becomes badder sort of thing. Yeah, and at least it got the atmosphere and the aesthetics right for me, whereas I didn't feel much atmosphere in the book. I didn't feel as scared I thought I was going to feel. Yes, and I felt it was generally just a bit of a drag, and it really, really slowed my reading down. So, please don't hate me if you're a Stephen King fan, if you love The Shining. Everyone is different. I will try other Stephen King books as well. I don't want you to worry if you're a Stephen King fan and you're like, no, but you should try this one. I will try other books. But that one certainly was not for me. So you can see I had a really up and down reading month. It sort of went from really, really good, and then we went all the way down slowly until I landed at The Shining. I'm already having a better reading time at the minute, which I'm very, very grateful for, and I am making more time for reading again, and I am excited for the books that I have left this year. Hopefully some good books to talk about in November and December. But thank you guys for watching this video. I'm sorry again that it was so late. I hope that won't happen with the November books. I don't think it will, because I have a little bit more time again from now on, so we should be totally fine to be back on track now. But thank you so much for watching today, and I will see you again very soon. Bye.